Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Up series here on NCAA Football 14 as we watch the stars of tomorrow competing in the 2022 college football season. Today we are going to wrap up the regular season with weeks 13, 14, and 15. We're going to figure out all the conference championships, and we are getting very, very close to the college football playoff. Last episode, we covered weeks 10, 11, and 12. A lot of turmoil in the top 25, a lot of drama. Maybe the biggest storyline of all is number one Oklahoma losing their first game of the year in week 12 in the snow to Texas A&M. So the Sooners drop their first game of the season, and that has paved way for Florida State to hop in as the number one team in college football. The only other undefeated teams are South Alabama and Middle Tennessee State, ranked at 2 and 3. So as of now, we have two Group 5 teams projected to make the playoff, with Georgia currently in 4th. UCF, Oklahoma, Michigan, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Arkansas round out the top 10. So today we're going to go through the final 3 weeks of the regular season, Week 13, Week 14, which is rivalry week. And there are some big-time rivalry matchups with teams both competing for playoff spots. And then Week 15 is a little bit quieter, but some of its highly ranked teams do play that week. So as we look at the projected conference championships, starting with the ACC, it is going to be Florida State and Georgia Tech. Both teams have already clinched their division. So in terms of the conference championship, not a lot of drama. Georgia Tech plays against Georgia for rivalry week in Week 14, which is going to be very important as both of those teams still have a shot at the playoff. In the Big 12, it'll probably be West Virginia against UCF or Baylor. West Virginia has already clinched their division. UCF, meanwhile, leads the Big 12 South, but Baylor is the head-to-head, so if UCF loses, then Baylor will pass them. In the Big 10, Michigan has already clinched the Big 10 East. They are fighting for a playoff spot. They had a huge game against Ohio State, who has the exact same record, or the exact same amount of losses. However, since Ohio State has 2 in-conference losses, no matter what happens in that game, Michigan will play in the Big 10 championship, which might bode well for Ohio State. If the Buckeyes do win their next 2 games, including Michigan, then they'll be 10-2. They won't have to play in the Big 10 championship, and maybe they'll get in the playoff. In the West, it looks like Wisconsin is the favorite. USC is a half a game back, but Wisconsin did beat USC. So if USC loses one more game or the Badgers win one more game, it'll be Wisconsin representing the Big 10 West. The Pac-12 is a giant mishmash with 7 of the top 10 teams all separated by a game. Nobody in this conference wants to be good at all, yet one of these teams is going to be playing in the Rose Bowl, and they will probably get demolished by whoever they play against. In the SEC, it'll most likely be Oklahoma and Georgia. However, Kentucky could be a team to watch. Although Arkansas is eliminated from conference championship contention, I guess you still might want to watch out for them for the playoff. So Georgia and Kentucky are separated by half a game. They play against each other this week. If Georgia wins, they will clinch their division. They also have to play against Georgia Tech. That's 2 really tough games for Georgia. And if they do beat Kentucky, they'll have to play against probably Oklahoma in the SEC championship. So those are 3 borderline top 10 teams that Georgia has to beat if they want to make the playoff. As we look at Kentucky's schedule, they play against Tennessee, but if they lose to Georgia, it won't matter. They'll be eliminated from the division. In the West, Oklahoma has pretty much already clinched a spot. Yeah, they've already officially won their division. They still play Alabama. So actually, I guess if the Crimson Tide do beat Oklahoma, then Alabama could make the SEC championship, but they would still have to beat Auburn as well. So barring something crazy, it'll be Oklahoma and Georgia, although neither of those teams have officially clinched yet. As for the Group 5 conferences, Navy is currently a game ahead of Tulane in the American Athletic East, with UAB also in the race as well. All 3 of those teams currently in the top 25. In the West, it'll probably be Rice or Memphis. For Conference USA, Middle Tennessee State, the obvious favorite here. If they win out, they're probably going to make the college football playoff. They still have Louisiana Tech, UTSA, and FIU. Louisiana Tech's probably the toughest game left. I wouldn't call that an easy slate, but they've beaten better teams throughout the year. Notre Dame leads the Independents, not that that's a real conference. In the MAC, Ohio looks to be the best team in this conference. Bowling Green was the preseason favorite, and they are currently in last place. So it looks like Ohio or Akron will win the East, and then in the West, everybody is separated by a game. So who the hell knows who's going to win that division? And then in the Mountain West, this conference has been pretty crazy this year. Air Force currently a game ahead of Boise State in the Mountain Division. And then in the West, San Diego State has a half-game lead over Hawaii and UNLV, with Fresno State, who was a preseason top 25 team, behind them. In the Sun Belt, South Alabama is the favorite here. They're in the same spot as Middle Tennessee State. If they win out, they're going to make the playoff. They've only beaten 2 teams who are currently over 500 this season, and their last 3 games are all against teams over 500. Southern Miss, which I think is their toughest game left, along with Troy and Marshall. The Southern Miss game could be a major trap game. The Southern Miss Golden Eagles have one of the best pass rushes in all of college football. And then behind South Alabama, there's a bunch of teams all within a game of each other. As we look at the Heisman watch, Michigan quarterback Bartholomew Blunt is the current favorite for the award. Cannon McMullen is in second. Masaru Lee is in third, with Elijah Bryant and Cade Hutchinson bringing up the rear. Personally, I think Georgia quarterback Clyde Williamson should be in there as well. He has an interception touchdown ratio of like 28-1. He's been really good. All the other awards have their listed favorites now out as well. We'll be following closely there once we get towards the end of the season and figure out who all of those award winners are. So as we look forward here through these next 3 weeks, this is it for the regular season. Next episode will be the conference championship games, and then after that we'll get to postseason play with all the bowl games, and of course the college football playoff. Weeks 13, 14, and 15 are here. Week 13 and 14, there are a lot of big-time games. Week 15, not as many, but we do have the Army-Navy game, which we will be going into big detail there once we get there. So as we look at Week 13's slate in specific, it'll be very interesting to follow all of the top teams, see which of them fall and find themselves out of the playoff race. Some big-time top 25 matchups, including Oklahoma and Alabama. The Sooners looking to rebound after losing to Texas A&M a week ago. Plenty of big-time matchups in the ACC. And, of course, Georgia and Kentucky, 2 top 10 teams. Winner of that game probably wins the SEC East. Florida State, they are now number 1. It'll be interesting to see how they do. So we're going to start off with the Florida State game. They head down to Syracuse at the Carrier Dome to take on the Syracuse Orange, who started the year off slowly. They've been a lot better as of late. This is certainly not a gimme game whatsoever for the undefeated Seminoles. In the first half, this looked like a defensive battle. Syracuse striked first. The Seminoles really struggled to get going on offense in the first quarter, but as the game went along, it felt like Florida State got a little bit more comfortable, and they were ultimately able to take a 10-7 lead going into halftime with a nice touchdown there by Garrett Rodriguez and a field goal. So going into the second half, I was curious to see how Syracuse would respond, and the Orange proved that they were up for the task. Syracuse took the lead in the third quarter, and it really seemed like they were able to gain control of this game. Quarterback Romano Fargnoli, who's been a little bit disappointing this season, had one of his best games of the year for a pretty talented Syracuse offense, who again started off slow but underperformed. As Syracuse was able to go on a little run, Florida State did a good job of answering back and keeping themselves in the ball game. This touchdown right here by Jacob King would ultimately bring the deficit to 3, as Syracuse would take a 28-25 lead. The Orange have it back, looking to finish the game off once and for all. Here comes Romano Fargnoli and Syracuse moving down the field. A very efficient drive for Syracuse, and again, if they take a touchdown, they'll be up by 10, which is probably enough to win the game. As the drive continued, Florida State's defense continued to look worn out, and ultimately Syracuse would be able to find the end zone. They took a 35-25 lead with about a minute to go. Florida State looked dead in the water, but don't count out the Seminoles as they quickly responded. Jacob King with a beautiful pass downfield, which would set up a touchdown not too long after, on a read option run by Jacob King, making it 32-35. Florida State needs the onside kick, and it is recovered by Syracuse, and there you go. For a second straight week, the number 1 team in the top 25 polls loses. Florida State no longer undefeated. They fall to number 8. They only have 1 loss. I don't think they're eliminated from playoff contention at all, but Florida State doesn't control their own fate as comfortably as they did going into this week. Florida State losing opens up the door for a lot of these teams behind them, including West Virginia, who heads to Bill Snyder Family Stadium to take on the Kansas State Wildcats. West Virginia is led by their potent pass game, led by junior quarterback Jose Alvaro, who connected on a nice screen there with J.K. Jordan. The Wildcats were up for the task, however, and I will say with West Virginia, they've played a lot of their opponents really close this year. Ultimately, the Mountaineers were able to survive 26-20 with a late touchdown here. Not a pretty win, but a solid win nonetheless for the Mountaineers, who jumped to the 6th ranking in the top 25 poll. Kansas State's offense had a pretty productive day, but ultimately they weren't able to get the upset. They fought a 4-7, 2-6 in conference. West Virginia, of course, has already clinched a spot in the Big 12 championship. Middle Tennessee State is ranked number 3. They face off against Louisiana Tech. I think this is Middle Tennessee State's hardest game left on the schedule. It'll be interesting to see if this game turns into a trap game. And it was pretty obvious early on that this was not a trap game. Middle Tennessee State dominated from the start. Matt Burnett continues to be an X factor for this offense as he caught a couple more touchdowns today. Senior quarterback Cedric Woods has had a phenomenal season for the Blue Raiders. And Middle Tennessee State has really positioned themselves well to potentially make the college football playoff as they would win this game 52-10. Cedric Woods, 6 incompletions, 5 touchdowns. He is very good. Matt Burnett, 12 for 142 and 2 scores. South Alabama heads down to Southern Miss to take on the Golden Eagles. Southern Miss is 5-4. They're a pretty good team, but they're nothing like spectacular. However, their pass rush is unbelievable. Southern Miss has 3 potential top 100 picks in terms of edge rushers. Here's Calvin Watson, 5.5 sacks this season, 6'7", 260 pounds. He had a huge day for the Golden Eagles, finishing with 2.5 sacks. On the other side of him, there's Roman Horn III, who leads all of college football in sacks with 8. He is a projected top 15 pick overall in the first round. He had 2 sacks today, pushing his total up to 10. What about Antonio Marlander, another projected top 100 pick in the 2nd or 3rd round? He had a sack as well today. Southern Miss's 3 big-time pass rushers were all very good today, which makes the fact that South Alabama won this game by 24 points even more impressive. Despite being under pressure really the entire game, senior quarterback Kedrick Brown had a phenomenal day in the air, connecting with his main target, Trey Williams, for a couple of touchdowns. Williams looks like a potential candidate for the Biletnikoff Award. Godfrey, their 3rd-string running back, had a huge day on the ground. Big win for South Alabama, who is now the number 1 ranked team in all of college football with Florida State's loss. Southern Miss's pass rush was really good with Horn, Watson, and Marlander all playing very well, combining for 5.5 sacks. Southern Miss had 7 sacks total, but that did not stop the South Alabama offense from absolutely eating. Kedrick Brown with 4 touchdowns today. Mike Evans caught 3, and Trey Williams had the other. Auburn heads down to Ole Miss to take on the Rebels. So this is Ole Miss's senior day, and they haven't had a good season. They're 2-8. It's been a disaster for Ole Miss, and they decided to do something a little bit different for this game. So their main starting quarterback is sophomore Danny Kendrickson. He started the game, drove the team down the field, and scored a touchdown. From there, Ole Miss decided to go to their backup quarterback, senior Ryan Payne, and give him the opportunity to play out the rest of this game. Just because he's a senior, he's never really gotten an opportunity to start, and they wanted to give him that chance. Sure enough, Ryan Payne was unbelievable today. He threw for 3 touchdowns, all 3 of which were caught by number 11, Zaire Patton, who looks to be a possible first-round pick in this year's upcoming draft. Ole Miss led this game big, and it really has felt like Auburn's season has fallen apart after starting off so hot. Then the bad dream ends, Auburn wakes up, and they go on a tear in the second half. Auburn is such a weird team because at times they're so good, but as I've said throughout this season, they do not play a full game of football for a consistent 60 minutes. Despite trailing by 4 scores going into halftime, the Tigers were able to get the victory over Ole Miss 45-40. Obviously, it wasn't pretty, but this late touchdown run by Kiki Rodriguez III was the nail in the coffin for Auburn to finish it off. The Tigers move up to number 11 as they prepare for the Iron Bowl next week in Tuscaloosa against the University of Alabama. Got to give credit to Ole Miss. They played really well in the first half, but it's like they kind of forgot how to play in the second half. They fall to 2-9 as they prepare for the Egg Bowl next week against Mississippi State, who has been equally as disappointing this season as Ole Miss. UCF heads down to Houston, Texas to take on the Cougars. Of the 4 new teams in the Big 12, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU, UCF has obviously been great. They're the number 5 team in college football. The other 3 teams have been very disappointing. I was curious to see how Houston would play in this game, and the Cougars really stood tough. This was a really close game, really for the entire time. Although UCF started off strong with a couple early rushing touchdowns by sophomore running back Givey and Atwater, the Cougars were very quick to respond. Sophomore quarterback Kane Sanders had one of his best performances of the year, and this game was very close going in late to the fourth quarter. This touchdown right here would ultimately put Houston ahead by 14 points, 31-17. So UCF would get the ball back. They needed to do some damage control, and sure enough, senior quarterback Bay Morant would get injured. Not a serious injury, but he's going to be out for the rest of the game, and backup Jeffrey Bergstand is going to have to win it. He started off pretty well with a beautiful touchdown here for sophomore wide receiver Jensen Young, making it a 31-24 ball game. After that, Houston got the ball back, looking to finish off the game. It's a screen for running back Jax Alcock, and he did not get it. So now UCF gets the ball back. They can look to tie the game. Bergstand would be picked off. The Cougars upset UCF, and the Knights' title hopes are pretty much down the drain. A big performance for Houston as Kane Sanders throws for 3 touchdowns. He ran for another one, and the Bay Morant injury really hurt UCF when it's all said and done. Luckily for the Knights, Bergstand is a senior. He's not going to be their starting quarterback next year. Him and Morant are both graduating. UCLA heads down to the Coliseum to take on USC, the 2 newest members of the Big Ten. Both of these schools, of course, still big-time rivals, and it's been a far more successful season for the Trojans. However, UCLA dominated early in this game. Senior fullback Edward McIntosh scored not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 touchdowns today. Now, McIntosh isn't your normal fullback. It's not like he's some scrub. He's the highest-rated fullback in college football and is probably going to be playing on Sundays in the NFL as a hybrid fullback power back. He had 2 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving scores. UCLA's senior quarterback Freddie Ham threw a couple of more touchdowns to his number 1 receiver Deegan Beckendum, and UCLA's offense was really, really good today. I will say the Trojans gave a nice fight late in this game. USC's offense has all the talent in the world, and it was displayed in the fourth quarter. Great performance once again by senior running back Patrick Daufriend, who's been one of the best playmakers in all of the Big Ten, but his 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns were not enough to stop the upset as UCLA beats USC 42-32. The Trojans remain in the top 25 at 23. UCLA finishes their regular season at 6-6. They are bowl eligible, but being 500, it's no guarantee that they do get into a bowl game. Oklahoma heads to Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa to face off against the number 17th ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama's got some questions to answer. Of course, they lost to Old Dominion in the last episode, and things aren't really going well right now for the Crimson, who have been one of the more disappointing teams in the SEC. Oklahoma's coming off of their first loss of the season. They have to respond, and Alabama looked pretty good early. The Tide have probably the best run game in all of college football. It was Quincy Murphy who got a bulk of the carries today, and he was really good. Oklahoma's run game, however, stood toe-to-toe. Ardarion Graham was the Heisman favorite in the preseason, and although he has not lived up to that hype, he has still been pretty solid. He had a good game today. The backup running back Darion Seals was pretty good as well. Shout out to Bryson Byrne, Alabama's quarterback. He's had a rough season, but he does connect here with Jaden Wilson-Miller for a touchdown. But ultimately, Oklahoma's offense was too much for Alabama to overcome. Heisman contender Masaru Lee had another great performance, running for a couple of touchdowns, and Oklahoma wins 41-27. The Sooners are now number 4 in the country. Kyle McCloskey and Quincy Murphy were both great on the ground for the Crimson Tide, but their defense could not stop Masaru Lee, who continues to improve his draft stock and his Heisman stock, and he looks like he's going to be a first-round pick in this year's draft. Ohio State needs to win out if they want to make the college football playoff. They have the big game next week in the Big House against Michigan, but they've still got to win this game here against Illinois. And sure enough, Ohio State was up to the task. I was a little bit worried for them that this could be a trap game, but it definitely was not. Marco Bromley had a pretty solid performance. Senior running back Emmanuel Cashmere had a great day as well for the Buckeyes, and they steamrolled through the Fighting Illini 45-17. Illinois started the year off really hot. They had that big win early in the season against UCLA, and, well, at one point it looked like Illinois was going to be a sleeper team in the top 25, but they have proven to be a little bit fraudulent as they fall to 5-6. Good win for the Buckeyes, who are now the number 9 team in college football. They will play against Michigan in Week 14. Winner of that game has a really good shot of making the college football playoff, but again, keep in mind, Michigan has already clinched the Big Ten East, which I think benefits Ohio State because they don't have to worry about the Big Ten championship, whereas Michigan does. Georgia heads to Kentucky to take on the Wildcats in the snow. 2 top 25 teams. If Georgia wins this one, they clinch their division, the SEC. I'm really curious to see how Kentucky's going to come out here. If the Wildcats win, maybe they would have a shot at the college football playoff. On the opening drive of the game, Benny Dixon with a nice touchdown here for Kentucky. And that's all the fun that the Wildcats would get. Georgia would score 35 unanswered points. Clyde Williamson is continuing to show why he is the best quarterback in college football and continuing to show why he will probably be the number 1 pick in this year's upcoming NFL draft, most likely to the Lions or the Texans. Poor guy. Williamson was great in this game. He threw for a couple of touchdowns. He ran one as well. Williamson has really improved as a runner this season, which has been a nice addition to the Georgia offense. They win the game 35-7. Georgia's now number 3 in the country. They have a huge game next week against Georgia Tech. Isaiah Gordon did not have a great day for Kentucky, completing 9 of his 24 passes, throwing for 2 interceptions. Williamson, on the other hand, threw for 2 touchdowns as the Bulldogs win this one big over Kentucky. The Wildcats are a good team, but they're not at the Georgia-Oklahoma level at the top of the SEC. So there you go. Week 13 now in the books. A lot of very interesting games. A lot of conferences have been clinched as we look at some of the other top 25 games. Tulane and Baylor both win. UConn stays in the top 25 with a win over Wake Forest. Michigan State over Indiana. Pitt beats Duke. They are now number 15. Clemson beats Boston College. UAB over ECU. And Arkansas finishes their regular season as they steamroll through UMass 45-7. In terms of the... Navy also won. They beat Florida Atlantic, and Georgia Tech beat Virginia Tech. All right, looking at some of the other games, Washington was able to beat Oregon 38-35. Very high-scoring game there, which has been typical of Oregon this year. Rutgers and Minnesota both back on the win column. Penn State drops 55 against Maryland. Where has this been all year from Penn State as they are 4-7? Utah beats Arizona State. Arizona beats Colorado. The Pac-12 continues to be just the strangest conference in all of college football. Texas beats Texas A&M. Good win for the Longhorns, 42-33. Washington State handles Oregon State. San Diego State handles Cal. Ohio, who looked like the best team in the MAC, gets killed by Western Michigan. Idaho's reign of terror ends as they lose to Iowa. Wisconsin falls to Nebraska, but with USC losing, Wisconsin has clinched a spot in the Big Ten Championship against Michigan. LSU beats South Carolina. The Tigers, after starting 0-7, win their final 5 games of the season. Florida beats a struggling Missouri team 31-28. UNC drops 48 on the Hurricanes. And in a battle of Big 12 juggernauts, Kansas gets the better of Iowa State. NC State beats Louisville in a battle of ACC juggernauts. So as we go into Week 14, which is rivalry week, we've got South Alabama and Middle Tennessee State at 1-2. Who would have thought? Georgia, Oklahoma, Michigan, and West Virginia round out the top 6. I think Florida State still has a very good shot at the playoff despite losing. Ohio State and Georgia have huge opportunities to raise their stock. Ohio State plays Michigan. Georgia Tech plays Georgia. And I don't really think anybody outside of the top 10 has much of a shot currently at the playoff. Some new teams in the top 25, A&M, Idaho, and Miami dropping out. As for the Heisman race, Masaru Lee and Bartholomew Blunt swap spots, so Lee is in first, Blunt is in third. Kate Hutchinson and Sidney McDonald move up to 4 and 5. Players of the week, Steve Johnson, linebacker for UNLV, and then Utah quarterback Wayne Mayer, who scores 5 total touchdowns. Let's talk about the big-time changes here in terms of conference play. So with UCF losing, it's Baylor, who is now the favorite in the South. If Baylor wins their final game against Oklahoma State, they will play in the conference championship because they beat UCF head-to-head. So Baylor has a chance to play West Virginia. As we talked about with the Big Ten, Wisconsin lost, but they're still in because USC finishes their in-conference slate 6-3, and Wisconsin has the head-to-head tiebreaker. Georgia and Oklahoma both officially clinched their divisions with their wins over Kentucky and Alabama, respectively. Assuming Georgia and Oklahoma win their final regular season games, the winner of the SEC championship will certainly go to the playoff. Georgia still has to play Georgia Tech, who is really good. Oklahoma has Oklahoma State, who's not as good. Arkansas could be a team to watch out for the playoff race, as they are currently number 7 in the poll, despite having 4 losses. Their season is already over. In the Pac-12, it's still a huge mishmash. 6 teams have 3 losses. Colorado and Utah are both kind of in the race as well. So I don't know what the hell is going on in that conference, but none of those teams really deserve it. So as we go into Week 14, a lot of big-time rivals facing off against each other. The 2 biggest games to watch out for are Georgia Tech and Georgia, and then Ohio State and Michigan, because in both of those games, both teams still have an opportunity at the college football playoff. I think Georgia and Michigan are probably the 2 better teams in those matchups, but we'll see if Georgia Tech or Ohio State can give them a run for their money. West Virginia opens us up here as they face off against the Kansas Jayhawks here in Week 14. West Virginia looking to finish their regular season with a record of 10-2. They have not lost an in-conference game so far. And unfortunately for them, the game started off not ideal as Nick Wiggins with a huge touchdown run here for the Jayhawks. But West Virginia's offense was too much. The Mountaineers pulling off the flea flicker on that play. Big performance for Jose Alvaro. He threw for 5 touchdowns, 3 of which were caught by senior wide receiver number 87, Lamar Rogers, who had a great game for West Virginia. They win it 45-28. They finish 10-2 with a 9-0 in-conference record and will play against most likely Baylor, if not UCF, in the conference championship game. And if West Virginia wins that, they very well could make the college football playoff. UCF just lost to Houston last week, a heartbreaker. Their playoff chances appear to be toast, but they still have a big-time rivalry game against USF. The Bulls are certainly not as good of a team, but they're no slouch either. These guys are 6-5. They're a very respectable program, and this game was really exciting early on. Senior quarterback Bay Morant is back for UCF after getting injured last week. He had a good performance tonight, along with running back Giveon Atwater, who scored once again. I really like USF's quarterback, Donovan Ferguson. He's only a sophomore, but he's a really talented playmaker. He can make big plays with his arm and his legs, as shown here throughout the game, connecting with Trey Parker for a nice touchdown. And that would be the game winner. USF upsets UCF 31-27, so the Knights fall to 20. Since this is not an in-conference game, UCF can still make the conference championship. They need Baylor to lose to Oklahoma State. All right, here we go. Georgia Tech heads to Sanford Stadium in Athens to take on the Georgia Bulldogs. The winner of this game has a really good shot at the college football playoff. I think Georgia's the better team on paper, but Georgia Tech gave them everything they got, and this game ended up being as good as advertised. Both offenses played phenomenally today. Georgia Tech's quarterback, Garrett Pace, has been one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country this year. I think he's done a fantastic job leading this offense, and although Georgia Tech's more of the run-first team, I think Pace has done a great job. On the other hand, we have Clyde Williamson, who is really, really good. He threw a number of touchdowns today. Quentin Spencer was his top target. Spencer was pretty much uncoverable throughout this game for Georgia Tech. Williamson would throw another touchdown here to the other team. This is senior cornerback Ellis Ermarn, a possible NFL draft pick with a pick 6. Just the second interception thrown all season by Clyde Williamson. But he would get right back to work on the next possession as he connects with Quentin Spencer for a couple of more touchdowns. This was an unbelievable play by Williamson, dancing in the pocket. And this touchdown would tie the game up at 35 about halfway through the fourth quarter. Georgia Tech gets it back, looking to take the lead. And sure enough, they do just that as Jordan Brown breaks multiple tackles. The Yellow Jackets lead by 7 late in the fourth, but Georgia would respond as Clyde Williamson takes it himself, tying the game at 42, bringing us to overtime. Georgia Tech starts with the ball, and they would do nothing. Big stop by the Georgia defense. The Yellow Jackets would be forced to kick a field goal. They now lead by 3. So Georgia now has the football. Can Clyde Williamson show what he's made of and lead the Bulldogs down the field? He starts off with a huge run inside the 10, and then on the very next play, Bartolomeo Malalu would walk it in as the Georgia Bulldogs survive 48-45 in overtime. A huge performance by Clyde Williamson, continuing to cement himself as the best quarterback in the country. Georgia wins both of the regular season games today against Kentucky and Georgia Tech. And if they beat Oklahoma in the SEC championship, not only is Georgia going to go to the college football playoff, but they may be the favorite to win it overall. Middle Tennessee State sits at 10-0. They have 2 games left as they head to the Alamo Dome to take on UTSA. Middle Tennessee State knows the opportunity they have in front of them to make the college football playoff. So because of that, they're not wanting their opponents to feel like they had the chance at all. And that's exactly what happened here. This game was an all-out blowout. Matt Burnett would score 2 more touchdowns, doing a great job as the number 1 receiver since Nehemiah Dalton suffered a season-ending broken vertebrae. Cedric Woods had another very good game in the air, as Middle Tennessee State has no problem winning this one 35-7. The Blue Raiders are now 11-0. They have 1 more game left on their schedule, and if they win that, they will finish the season undefeated, as Conference USA does not have an actual conference championship game. So if Middle Tennessee State wins their final game, they are pretty much a sure thing in the college football playoff. Tennessee heads to Kentucky to take on the Wildcats. Both of these teams are out of playoff and SEC contention, but they're both top 25 teams. They're both rivals, so I figured I would still cover this game. It was a pretty exciting one, Kentucky rocking the black jerseys, and I think these jerseys might have given them good luck because the Wildcats were able to survive 31-28. Isaiah Gordon had a bounce-back game after playing horrifically last week against the Georgia Bulldogs. Good win for Kentucky, who finishes the season 9-3 with an opportunity to play in a New Year's Six bowl game. As for Tennessee, they finished their regular season 7-5. You got to feel disappointed if you're a Tennessee fan because the Vols started the year off really good. They won their first 5-6 games. Then quarterback Benjamin McKenzie gets injured and it all falls apart. Here we go, one of the biggest games of the week. Ohio State heads to the Big House to take on number 5 Michigan. The winner of this game has a really good opportunity to make the playoffs. If the Buckeyes win, they'll be 10-2. They'll be done for the rest of the season. As for Michigan, they play Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship, but if they win both of those games, they'll probably be in the playoff. Sure enough, just like the Georgia Tech game, this matchup gave us everything we bargained for. It felt like for most of the game, Ohio State was in control, but Michigan never let them break away. And if we've seen anything with the Wolverines this season, they have played at their best when they've been behind. I mean, this same Michigan team came back down 28-0 a few weeks ago against Michigan State. Bartholomew Blount had a great game for Michigan at quarterback, as did Marco Brumley, who also had a phenomenal game as well. Michigan took the lead into halftime, but Ohio State responded in a big way in the third quarter, scoring a pair of touchdowns. This one right here by Emmanuel Cashmere would put the Buckeyes ahead 35-24. Michigan would get it back to start the fourth as Bartholomew Blount breaks tackles. He will run into the end zone for a touchdown, and then after that, Michigan would elect to go for 2, making a field goal deficit as Blount would connect with his true freshman tight end Isaiah McGowan, 35-32. Ohio State gets it back. What a play here by Emmanuel Cashmere, getting through defenders for an excellent run into Michigan territory. All the Buckeyes need to do is score a touchdown, and this game is pretty much over as there's not a lot of time left on the clock. And sure enough, the Buckeyes are marching down the field with no problem. However, on a third down, Emmanuel Cashmere was stopped, forcing the Buckeyes to kick a field goal. Kick is good, but Michigan gets the ball back down by 6 and an opportunity to win the game. Put the ball in the hand of the Heisman Trophy and let him go to work. Bartholomew Blount is proving why he is the best player in college football this season with an unbelievable throw here to T.K. Thomas, the junior wideout. Michigan would continue to march down the field, and sure enough, Bartholomew Blount would strike the Heisman pose, going in for the touchdown to tie the game up. That's his Heisman moment. Really, that entire drive was Blount's Heisman moment, but to strike the pose, going into the end zone to tie the game up is huge. All Michigan has to do is make the extra point, and they split it right down the middle. Michigan survives. They win it 39-38 over the Buckeyes in an unbelievable thriller. Wow, what a game. So Michigan will go into the Big Ten Championship against Wisconsin, and if Michigan wins, they will probably make the college football playoff. But one thing I'm worried about with Michigan is they lost head-to-head earlier this season against West Virginia, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get towards the end of the episode. Here we go. We got the Iron Bowl between Alabama and Auburn. Alabama's been disappointing to their standards this season. Auburn started the year off great and has been a little bit more disappointing since then. And sure enough, Alabama would run down Auburn's throats. Bryson Byrne had a good game in the air as well, throwing for 3 touchdowns, 2 of which were caught by one of the backup receivers in Coleslaw Appleby, a once top recruit, getting an opportunity to play today, and he was really good. On the other side, the slot receiver Cooper Jensen was great as well. Alabama's top 2 receivers, Jaden Wilson-Miller and Khalil Hassan, were both held without a catch. The 2 of them have been 2 of the more disappointing players in college football as Alabama wins 42-21. Auburn is now 8-4. Not sure if they're going to get a New Year's Six bowl. Alabama moves up to 15. Again, I'm not sure if they're going to get a New Year's Six bowl either. Also with the record of 8-4. Florida State coming off their loss last week against Syracuse, hoping to rebound here against their rivals, the Florida Gators at Doak Campbell Stadium. Unfortunately for Florida, they will be without starting quarterback Genesis Moon as he suffered a bruised shoulder. Ernie Capillar will be the backup quarterback. This game really turned into a battle of the ground game. Both teams ran the ball very well. With Florida being without their starting quarterback, they relied more than ever on Elijah Bryant, who I've said has been the best running back in college football this season, and he continued to show why today, running for 2 more touchdowns. However, once Florida State was able to get their star running back, Brody Kluby, in a good rhythm, Florida never really stood a chance in this game. Brody Kluby ran for 3 scores as Florida State would get back on the win column. The Seminoles beat their rivals 42-24. Florida State finishes the regular season 11-1 and will meet against Georgia Tech in the ACC championship game. If Florida State wins that one, they've got a very compelling argument to make the college football playoff. I don't get why Florida State is ranked lower than teams like Michigan, West Virginia, and Arkansas. West Virginia and Michigan have 2 losses, and Arkansas has 4. I know losses later in the season certainly hurt, but still, I feel like Florida State's getting a little bit disrespected. They have a great body of work. They've beaten some really good teams this year, including Clemson, who has their final game of the regular season against South Carolina. The Gamecocks spent most of this season ranked, but they've performed really poorly these past few weeks, and if they lose this game, they will finish their season under 500 at 5-7. So Clemson's had a very weird season, and I feel like they've been a little bit disappointing. And at the beginning of this season, we pegged their quarterback, Cade Hutchinson, as the chosen one. We referred to him as the best quarterback prospect in college football. And Hutchinson has very under the radar lived up to the hype. Hutchinson's had a phenomenal season this year for Clemson, and although the Tigers have been a little bit disappointing, and Hutchinson hasn't found himself at the top of the Heisman watch, I don't think we've realized how good of a season Cade Hutchinson has had. If Hutchinson does declare for the draft this year, keep in mind he is a redshirt junior, if he declares this year, he's definitely going to be a first-round pick, maybe the first or second quarterback off the board. And if he does not declare this year, then Clemson's going to be one of the main favorites for the national championship next season. South Carolina finishes their season 5-7, disappointing considering how good they were early in the season. Couple of big-time rivals here, Notre Dame and USC. The Fighting Irish are red hot. They started the year off slowly, but they've been playing some really good football ever since then. I think this game was a battle of which quarterback wants to play worse. Both starting QBs in this one were horrendous. For USC, Scotty Kimbrell II threw 5 interceptions, 2 of which were caught by Notre Dame's top corner, A.J. Brown, who looks to be a first or second round pick in this year's upcoming draft. We will highlight him along with the other top defensive backs in the next Tennessee Titans franchise episode when we do the prospect profile on defensive backs. Oddly enough, Scotty Kimbrell was the better starting quarterback, though. Notre Dame's QB, Sosa Hupie, completed 2 passes. He also had this pick 6 as well. So it really came down to which team ran the ball better, and both run games were very good. Patrick Daughtry had another good performance on the ground for USC. Their backup, Anthony Raymond, had a good game as well. Notre Dame ran the ball very well, too. The Fighting Irish run a very gimmicky, college-style offense, and we haven't really been able to see quarterback Sosa Hupie live up to his true potential as a passer, which is why I have a hard time thinking he's going to be drafted early. Notre Dame's star running back Nate Washington ran wild in this game, and ultimately USC was not able to stop him. Washington would lead Notre Dame to win 42-32. Certainly an interesting game, and it's odd that the two best players, Nate Washington and A.J. Brown, are both namesakes of former Titan receivers, two former good Titan receivers. Scotty Kimbrell, 10 for 28, 5 interceptions. Sosa Hupie, 2 for 11, 10 yards and an interception. It's crazy that at the beginning of the year, we were talking about Sosa Hupie as a first-round pick. How things change. South Alabama is the number 1 ranked team in the country. If they win out, they're going to be in the college football playoff. And just like Middle Tennessee State, I don't think South Alabama really wants their opponent thinking that they've got any shot in this game. So sure enough, the South Alabama Jaguars would dominate. Kedrick Brown and Trey Williams continued their electric connection, and South Alabama would win this game 35-7, the same score that Middle Tennessee State won their game. So just like with Middle Tennessee State, South Alabama plays in a conference where there is not a conference championship game. So if South Alabama wins their final game of the season in Week 15 against Marshall, then they'll finish the year undefeated, and they'll make the college football playoff. So it'll be very interesting to see with Middle Tennessee State and South Alabama, who play their final games this week, if they're able to win, stay undefeated, and put themselves in the playoff. As for the other top 25 games, Air Force is now ranked. They beat Boise State. Air Force moves on to the Mountain West Conference Championship. Miami beats Pitt. They're back in the top 25, as is Texas, who beats UMass. Ohio is ranked. They beat Miami of Ohio. Navy over Rice. Memphis over Tulane. Baylor over Oklahoma. Rutgers over Idaho. So with Baylor winning, they clinch a Big 12 championship spot against West Virginia. Looking at the other scores, Southern Miss rails Illinois by 30. UConn beats Houston. Penn State narrowly defeats Indiana. BYU beats Cincinnati. So Houston finishes with 4 wins, BYU and Cincinnati with 5 wins, which makes UCF's season even more impressive. Wisconsin with one more tune-up before the Big Ten Championship. They beat Purdue. Maryland beats Michigan State. Iowa defeats Nebraska. Washington State defeats Washington. Stanford beats Northwestern, although I think all the football players on those two teams were just studying the entire game. Duke beats North Carolina. Missouri defeats Texas A&M. NC State finishes their season 3-9 as they lose to Wake Forest. Syracuse loses to Boston College. Mississippi State wins the Egg Bowl, and Colorado defeats Utah. Arizona State defeats Arizona, and Oregon drops 55 on Oregon State. So as we hop into Week 15, most of the top teams are done. Middle Tennessee State and South Alabama still have one more game. Oklahoma still has to play Oklahoma State in Bedlam. Of course, we have Army-Navy as well. Navy is ranked number 14. I'm excited to go into detail about that game with a number of new teams entering and exiting the top 25. Looking at the Heisman Watch and the Players of the Week, we'll start with Players of the Week. Albert Greco for Washington and quarterback Barrett Cherokee for Oregon. I guess I forgot to click the Heisman thing, but as you would expect, Bartholomew Blunt, the Michigan quarterback, is now in first place after his great performance against Ohio State. So as we go into Week 15, it's a small slate. There's only around 10 or 15 games, but there are some big ones. The top 2 teams in the country have an opportunity to clinch playoff spots. A lot of Pac-12 games, and we'll figure out what the deal is with the Pac-12. There is no conference championship game in the Pac-12, which is unfortunate because California plays Oregon and Washington State plays Arizona State, so the 2 winners could have played against each other in the conference championship, but unfortunately there's no conference championship game. All right, let's talk about Army and Navy. I decided to do something a little bit different for this game. For the conference championships and big-time bowl games, we're going to be watching them in full. So that's what I decided to do here with Army and Navy to test out the sliders. Let's look at Navy. They are 9-2. Their only losses come against Marshall all the way back in Week 1, and then Middle Tennessee State, as you would expect. Navy plays in the American Athletic Conference, who has a number of really good teams. As for Army, they started their season 5-0. They have lost 5 of 6, but it's because they've had a really tough schedule. They've played against teams like USC, Air Force, Texas, and Alabama. Outside of USC, those other 3 games I just said were decided within 1 possession. I think Navy's the favorite here, but both of these teams are really good. Navy's defense is loaded. They have the best defense probably in all of college football. They run the triple option offense led by senior quarterback Maxwell Martindale. In the backfield, they're led by Torian Wilson and Gleason Webb. Wilson has amassed around 2,400 rushing yards in just 2 seasons with the midshipmen. As for Army, they run a more traditional styled offense. They've moved away from the triple option. They're led by junior quarterback Amita Coney, who's had a pretty good season passing the ball, and he's a decent enough runner as well. J.D. Reese leads the backfield along with Sandro Turnal. They have a number of really good weapons on offense with Casey Mitchell, who's had a very good season for them as a senior, and alongside him, Anthony Davis. These two guys are the Twin Towers. They're both 6'4", and at tight end, they've got junior Carlito Azusa, who is averaging 73 yards per game as one of their big breakout candidates. As we look at the team stats, obviously what stands out is Navy is in the top 2 in every major defensive statistic. Their defense is unbelievable. So here we go. Welcome to Lincoln Financial Field, home of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Temple Owls, as well as the 2022 Army-Navy game between Army and Navy. As I said, we're going to be actually watching this game, and I chose this game because it's always a special game each year, and I wanted to watch one game in full before we get to the conference championships and bowl games, because all of them are going to be watched like this. Army got the ball first. They're driving down the field pretty well. Amita Coney alone in the backfield here on first down, looking to run with it, and he is sacked by the big defensive tackle, Jabal Anderson II, one of the many great players on this loaded Navy defense. I mean, they are stacked on that side of the ball. 3rd and 14, Coney looking for the end zone. It's caught for a touchdown by Anthony Davis, and the midshipmen start this one on the board. A good drive for Army as they get the touchdown, so Navy gets the football here for the first time today. We'll see what their offense can do. Maxwell Martindale, the option-styled quarterback, opens up with a big run. We'll be seeing Navy in the American Conference Championship as well, as they went undefeated within conference play. Martindale fumbles the toss. Torian Wilson's able to dive on it, but it's a loss of more than 10 yards for the Navy offense, and they would have to punt it away. Good start for Army as they get the ball back. First down, Amita Coney does a good job of escaping pressure, bakes his way through the pocket, and runs for a first down, getting 17. That would ultimately set up a field goal. I'm surprised they're kicking here. This is a 50-yard attempt, and kicker Orlando Walker would nail it. I disagree with that call. Even though Walker is one of the best kickers in college football, you got to punch it in there on 4th and inches. So now Navy has the ball. They've gone for a very fast-styled tempo on offense, a lot of no huddles. As on 3rd and 8, Martindale's pass is caught by Nick Allen, but he's unable to get the first down, wrapped up by linebacker Brock Barnes. That'll wrap up the first. Army leads this game 10-0. I told you, don't sleep on Army. They're a legitimately good team, and even though Navy's ranked higher, I'm not surprised at all that Army is not only giving them a run for their money, but playing well so far. Into the second quarter, 2nd and 7. Here's J.D. Reese, smothered in the backfield for a loss of 4 by Ray Robinson, the senior linebacker. Navy has a bunch of guys, including Robinson, who are probably going to be playing on Sundays. Army will ultimately kick the field goal, and it doinks off the crossbar, no good. Orlando Walker misses the field goal. As we look at it again, it definitely had the distance, but it doinks off the right crossbar, and it remains 10-0. Big play there for Navy. We'll see if they can get some momentum off of the unfortunate special teams play for Army. Here's Martindale, keeps it himself, cuts to the left, and he is wrapped up past the 35 for a very nice gain of around 22. Good play for Martindale, and that'll keep the chains moving here for Navy. Continuing to move it here, 2nd and 10 here. Martindale again looks to keep it, fumbles the ball again, and it's recovered by Torian Wilson. Brock Barnes once again in the backfield making the play, and as you can see, it looks like Martindale's knee is down, so they are going to reverse the play. It's still a loss of about 5 instead of 10. Navy still has to be a little bit more careful with the ball. 3rd and 13, good pass by Martindale. It goes for a first down. Travis Heller gains 14, so that'll move the chains, and Navy will ultimately position themselves to kick a field goal as they look to make it just a one-possession ball game. The kick is up. It is good. And it is now 10-3. So Navy's on the board. They're only down by 7. But their defense has got to step up. Again, they're ranked in the top 2 in every major statistic. But junior quarterback Amita Coney has done a really good job against them today. Not just as a passer, but also as a runner. It's a 4th and 1. Army has kicked multiple times in 4th and short situations, but not here. They're going to go for it. I like the aggressiveness from head coach Manuel Castillo as Amita Coney barely gets it. Both of these teams are coached by former Metropolis quarterbacks. For Army, it's Manuel Castillo, and it's fitting that they run a more pro-style offense because he's more of a pro-style quarterback. And Navy's coach is Rod Roberson, who was a little bit more of a scrambler when he was the Metropolis QB. Marcus Wheeler is in the end zone for a touchdown, and Army leads 17-3. I knew Army was good. I didn't realize they were that good. Martindale is intercepted. It continues to get worse for the Navy midshipmen, as it's Brock Barnes who picks it off. Barnes has been all over the field today. The Black Knights already lead by 14, and now they have a chance to take an even bigger lead here late in the first half. On first down, Amita Coney under pressure. He is sacked for a loss of 5. Good start to the drive by Navy as it's Dane Holland, one of the senior linebackers, in to make the play. That'll bring out the field goal team. 4th and 12 here for Orlando Walker. 1 for 2 on field goals here, and he is good. So Walker splits the uprights, and it is now a 20-3 ball game, and that'll bring us to the half. I thought this game was going to be really close, I got to be honest. I'm very surprised Army is winning by this much. I'm surprised Army has scored 20 points. Navy has allowed less than 20 points per game throughout the season. The midshipmen start with the ball in the second half. They've got to get it together or else things could get ugly. 3rd and 8, short throw caught by Torian Wilson, who gains 7. Big tackle there by the Army defense. Navy would elect to punt it. Probably the right call. No reason to go for it at like the 30. So Army gets it back. Nice throw up the middle by Amita Coney as he connects once again with Anthony Davis for the play. Army would eventually have to kick a field goal here as Walker's kick is up. And it doinks, and it doinks again. A double doink from Orlando Walker. He has now hit the crossbar 3 times today as we look at this one again. Doink, doink, and it's no good. So it remains 20-3 as Navy gets the ball back after Walker does his best Cody Parkey, or I guess now his best Will Lutz impression, as on 3rd and 5. Maxwell Martindale looks to throw it under some pressure, and he is going to be stopped short for a gain of 1. I don't know what Martindale was trying to do that play. That was just really weird. So Navy would punt it again. I would have considered going for it. At this point, what do you have to lose? Army has it back, and quarterback Amita Coney is continuing to play well as he connects for another first down, again with his tight end, Carlito Azusa. 2nd and 4 now. It looks like Coney will go to the air again, and it's caught once again by Army. It's Marcus Wheeler, the backup tight end, who brings it into the red zone, and we are now through 3. No score change. It remains 20-3. Army has it on the doorstep of the end zone as they look to finish this game out once and for all. Since this game is a blowout, we're going to try to go through the 4th quarter pretty quickly, unless Navy makes a comeback. 3rd and goal, Coney looking to throw it right at the 1-yard line, and he will eventually evade the pressure and run in for a touchdown. Army now leads 27-3. Sure enough, Navy would finally drive down the field. It took them a while, as Martindale would toss it over to the running back, Zach Merrill, for a score, and it's now 27-9. 2-point conversion makes it a 16-point game, so Navy's going to go for 2. This is Daniel Washington, and he is short. So Washington gets stopped by the big defensive tackle, Chewbacca Jones. Army would then move down the field. It's a 1st and goal at the 1, as it looks like Amita Coney keeps it himself for another rushing touchdown. I've been really impressed with Amita Coney. This guy can play, and keep in mind he's only a junior. So Army wins 34-9, a blowout victory for the Black Knights. I thought this game was going to be close, and I was very wrong. Navy's defense really disappointed me. Their offense really did not play well either. Martindale was I guess he was fine. Torian Wilson getting the ball 2 times is a travesty. He's their best offensive playmaker. He needs the ball in his hands more than twice. Navy did send a good amount of pressure, but other than that, a little bit disappointing. We'll get back to our regular recap style as we kick off with Middle Tennessee State going up against FIU. If Middle Tennessee State wins this game, they finish 12-0. They become conference champions. They don't have the conference championship game, and thus pretty much clinch a spot in the playoff. Middle Tennessee knows what is at stake, and they did not let the moment get to them. Another big-time performance from the Blue Raiders as Cedric Woods threw 2 more touchdowns, both of which were acrobatically caught by Jason Johnson. 52-20 is your final. Middle Tennessee State finishes the season 12-0. unless the College Football Playoff Committee pulls a fast one, Middle Tennessee State is going to the playoff. Who could have guessed that at the beginning of the season? What a ride it has been for Middle Tennessee State, who lost their starting quarterback and their best receiver. Cedric Woods was the starting QB last year. He lost the job to Archie, but once Archie got hurt, Cedric Woods came in and played great. Nehemiah Dalton, again, he is out for the year with an injury, so they needed guys to step up. Guys like Jason Johnson, Jacob Pitts, and of course Matt Burnett have certainly done that. Middle Tennessee State is a great body of work. They've beaten good teams like North Carolina, Memphis, Navy, Rice, Louisiana Tech. These are not bad teams, and they are red hot. All of their recent wins are by a lot of points. South Alabama's in the exact same spot that Middle Tennessee State is. South Alabama with a win improves to 12-0. This is their last game before the playoffs are decided, so again, if they win, they are in. And just like Middle Tennessee State, South Alabama did not let the moment get to them. Kedrick Brown threw for 6 touchdowns in this one, 3 of which were caught by Trey Williams, who now has 24 receiving touchdowns on the season and has really made a case to win the Fred Biletnikoff Award as the best receiver in college football. South Alabama wins 49-17. South Alabama had to prove something going into today. They've only beaten 2 over 500 teams, and they beat 3 of them in this episode. Not only does South Alabama essentially clinch a playoff spot, but they're probably going to be the #1 overall seed going into the college football playoff. As we look at their story, just like Middle Tennessee State, they have dealt with injuries too. Star quarterback Kedrick Brown missed some time this year, but he's fully healthy. He's good to go. Keon Monroe, their star running back, got hurt early in the season, but Monroe will be back for the college football playoff. So unlike Middle Tennessee State, South Alabama's going to be fully healthy. Their starting quarterback's going to be good. Their running back's going to be good. They've got some great players on defense. Tariq Callahan's turned into a star. Cardell Simpson's one of the best corners in college football. He's probably going to be a first-round pick in this year's draft. South Alabama's beaten some pretty solid teams like Houston. They killed Idaho, who is obviously quite good. Southern Miss is pretty solid as well. I think their resume is a little bit worse than Middle Tennessee State's, but I also think South Alabama is a little bit better of a team than Middle Tennessee State. Their defense is one of the best in the country. They have the great offense as well. Very deserving of the college football playoff spot. Let's talk about the Pac-12, because this entire conference is drunk. But the winner of this game has a great chance of winning the conference and making it to the Rose Bowl. This was a very one-sided game. The Oregon Ducks offense pretty much dominated, and the tale of the season for the Ducks has been a lot of points on both sides of the ball. Their offense has been fantastic. Tyler Royal caught 2 touchdowns today for the Ducks, as did Deron Payton. So that's 4 total passing touchdowns for sophomore quarterback Barrett Cherokee, who's one of the most explosive offensive players in college football. Cal never really stood a chance against the Oregon Ducks. Your final score, 42-28. The problem with Oregon this year and why they didn't live up to their potential has been the defense. And although the defense was pretty good today against a solid Cal offense, the reason why Oregon's 7-5 and not 11-1 is because they've had too many games against lackluster offenses where the defense completely goes off. It felt like Oregon scored at least 30 every game this season, yet they're only 7-5. We've got Bedlam here in Norman, Oklahoma. Very one-sided game on paper. Oklahoma State's really bad. They're 3-8. Oklahoma is really good. They had the chance to keep themselves in college football playoff contention, and they did not let themselves down. The Sooners dominated this game, winning at 45-13. Oklahoma ran the ball really well. It wasn't a dominant performance from quarterback Masaru Lee, who didn't really help his Heisman candidacy, but he obviously didn't hurt it either because he didn't have the bad game at all. Oklahoma was able to get through this test, and they are now ready for the SEC championship game against Georgia. I think the winner of that game will not only make the college football playoff, but they'll be the overall favorite in the college football playoff, and I'll explain a little bit more as to why when we preview the conference championships at the end of the episode. As for Oklahoma State, Jorgensen Jupiter at quarterback threw 4 interceptions. Not his day. Washington heads down to Arizona to take on the Wildcats. Arizona is, of course, led by senior wide receiver Scotty Pickens, who's going to be a first-round pick. He had another great day today. 6 catches, nearly 100 yards, and a touchdown. But he was really the only bright spot for Arizona. The rest of their offense wasn't great. Their defense really struggled. Washington's quarterback, Keontae Jordan, threw for 5 touchdowns and ran for another one. I think Keontae Jordan is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in college football. We haven't shown him a lot of love this season because he's been on a mediocre Washington team. but he's a really good player. Kareem Kamara is also a really good player, the Arizona quarterback, but he was not so great today. 11 of 27, 2 interceptions. Scottie Pickens was great, but the rest of the team, not so much. Both of these teams will make a bowl game, but they won't make, like, a crazy good bowl game. They'll just make one of those, like, not as relevant ones that happened before Christmas. And then the final regular season game of the season, Washington State faces off against Arizona State. Both of these teams have 3 in-conference losses, just like the Oregon Ducks do. So the winner of this game could win the conference and advance to the Rose Bowl. This was a pretty one-sided matchup. Arizona State was definitely the better team. Junior wide receiver Hector Estrada III had a great game. He's now over 1,000 yards on the season. Running back Chuck Chester was also very solid as the Sun Devils win it 36-21. Arizona State finishes the regular season 7-5, 6-3 in conference. Good game from quarterback Lucas Harrington, who threw a touchdown. And then on the other side, Washington State not quite as good. They finished 6-6, hoping they get lucky in terms of getting a bowl game. So Oregon and Arizona finished at 6-3 in conference. However, since there's no conference championship game, we got to figure out a champion now. The Ducks beat Arizona State head-to-head 27-24, so that means Oregon has won the Pac-12. They will play in the Rose Bowl. Here's a look at the other games around the rest of college football. Nothing overly notable. Again, not a strong slate of games other than the ones we covered. In the top 25 polls, there was virtually no change. Navy dropped all the way from 14 to out of the poll. There was no change ahead of Navy, and then every team behind Navy moved up 1 spot, with USC moving back into the top 25 as they are now 25th overall. So not too much change there. As we look at some of the other stuff, starting with the Heisman watch, Bartholomew Blunt remains in first place, Masaru Lee in second, Kate Hutchinson in third, with Cannon McMullen and Elijah Bryan also in the top 5. It looks like those 5 players are going to be invited to New York for the Heisman ceremony. As for players of the week, that's week 1. Those are 1 players. It ended up going to Jim Franz on defense and Keontae Jordan, the Washington quarterback, on offense. So let's talk about these conference championship games. We've got 7 of them. And we've got some big-time matchups, none bigger than Georgia-Oklahoma. The winner of this game will 1,000% make the college football playoff, probably as the 3 seed against Middle Tennessee State, most likely. I think the winner of this game is going to be the overall favorite in the playoff. These are the 2 best teams in the country, in my opinion. They had the 2 best quarterbacks in the country, Clyde Williamson and Masaru Lee, who are both going to be first-round picks. So I have a hard time thinking the winner of that game won't be the overall favorite once we get to the playoffs. I'm really curious to see how that one goes. As for the other super relevant games, Georgia Tech and Florida State's going to be a big one. If Florida State wins, they still have a shot to make the college football playoff at 11-1. Georgia Tech looking to play spoiler. If Georgia Tech wins, then they will get an automatic bid to the Discover Orange Bowl. Wisconsin and Michigan is a big one. Of course, if Michigan wins, they probably make it in as the 4th team. However, West Virginia could stop that. So the West Virginia-Michigan dilemma is very interesting because they both had nearly identical seasons, 10-2, undefeated in conference. I think Michigan's the better team. They have the Heisman favorite at quarterback. But West Virginia beat Michigan back in week 2. That's a big deal, and I think the committee will care about that head-to-head result, even though it happened all the way back in September in episode 2 in both of these 2 teams' first games of the season. It was a close one, only decided by 3 points, but it was in Michigan. So again, I'm really curious to see how the committee handles that if both of those teams win. We also have Memphis Navy, Hawaii Air Force, and Western Michigan, Ohio. We're going to show those 3 games some love as well, but our main focus in the next episode is going to be on the other 4 Power 5 games that have playoff implications. We're going to watch all 7 of those games, just like we did with the Army-Navy game today. And then that's what the conference championship episode is going to look like. At the end of the conference championship episode, we're going to go over the Heisman, we're going to go over the award winners, and of course, most importantly, we're going to go over the 4 teams who will be playing for the college football playoff. And then after that, we'll get into bowl season and obviously the college football playoff itself. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode. I know it was a long one, but we had a lot of stuff to get through. It's been a really fun regular season, and I'm excited to see how postseason play will go as we crown our very first national champion in the NCAA Next Up series. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.